Hi, welcome to Medina True Crime. If you love true crime stories, go ahead and subscribe for more stories such as this one. I hope you're having a great day, morning, or evening, wherever you are. The case we'll be discussing today is the case of the Ken and Barbie killers. This Canadian couple is Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo. Karla Leanne Homolka was born on May 4th, 1970. She has also gone by the names Karla Leanna Teal and Karla Leanna Bordelais. She is the eldest of three children, so she has two younger sisters, Lori Homolka and Tammy Homolka. Lori would change her name to Logan Valentini because of the controversy that would result from her sister's actions. By all accounts, Karla had a normal life, a normal household with both parents. She was a well-liked child and loved animals. She would later go on to work part-time at a pet store as a teenager and later at an animal hospital. Paul Bernardo, on the other hand, was born on August 27th in 1964 into a stable middle-class family as well. In 1975, his father, Kenneth Bernardo, was charged with child molestation, and there were rumors that he had even molested his own daughter. Paul did not seem affected by the actions of his father or whatever the community would think of his family, at least not on the outside. Those who knew him growing up recalled him always being happy and that he would be smiling a lot. Around the time that Paul was 16, however, his mother revealed to him that he was born outside of the marriage as a result of an extramarital affair, and this is an event that would cause a noticeable change in him. It was said that he began to refer to his mother by demeaning and disrespectful names. His anger at his mom may have affected his treatment of women, as he would charm women as he grew older and then would later humiliate and abuse them. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka's paths would cross in October of 1987 at a restaurant where they were both attending a convention in Toronto. She was 17 and he was 23. They entered quickly into an intense relationship, and Paul soon became a fixture in the Homolka family. Despite the pictures portraying a perfectly normal and happy couple, this pair would go on to commit unthinkable acts. Paul had a propensity for violence before meeting Karla, but he said that Karla encouraged the behavior and also became his partner in crime. Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo would be known as the Ken and Barbie killers because they were both blonde and good-looking and apparently were reminiscent of the popular dolls. In May of 1987, the suburb of Scarborough, Ontario, was plagued with a series of horrific crimes perpetrated on teen girls and young women between the ages of 14 and 21. It was a scary time. Women were being attacked pretty much in the open as they were getting off the bus, for example. No one felt safe. After a series of these crimes, the perpetrator was deemed the Scarborough rapist. The victims would be attacked from behind, and the attack would be accompanied by beatings as well as threats of violence if the victim were to go to the police. When all was said and done, there would be around 19 rapes or attempted rapes reported, though the number varied from one source to the next. In November of 1988, the Metropolitan Toronto Police formed a task force committed to the arrest of the Scarborough rapist. The investigators did not get any significant leads until around May of 1990, however, when finally a victim was able to give a description. The police created a computer-generated sketch that was heavily circulated. Among the 16,000 responses received over the following weeks after the circulation had begun, 3 had actually identified Paul Bernardo as the person in the sketch. Paul, who lived with his parents in Scarborough at the time, would be questioned twice, and he apparently was able to lie convincingly, as the police were satisfied that he was not likely the suspect. However, as protocol dictated, they took a sample of his hair, blood, and saliva for DNA testing. DNA testing was very new then, and there was only one qualified scientist, one technician at the Center for Forensic Science. There were about 50,000 samples that were collected at the time by the police across Ontario. The Scarborough rapist would be active for about 5 years and later would be identified as Paul Bernardo. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka would go on to commit crimes together. They would not only assault and rape, but they had also escalated to murder. The crimes that they had committed were the murder of Tammy Homolka, who was 15, Leslie Mahaffey, 14, and Kristen French, 15. The first murder victim, Tammy Homolka, was actually the youngest sister of Karla Homolka. Even though Paul Bernardo was dating her sister and would later go on to get engaged and marry her, Paul had been fixated on Tammy. It was said that he would flirt with her, he would peep through her window, and even at one point he would masturbate in her room while she slept, and all with the help of Karla. The Christmas of 1990, Karla had planned to gift Paul her sister's virginity. It is said that Paul would tease her about not being a virgin when they met, so to make up for this, she would give him a virgin. Of all the people in the world, Karla would use her sister to appease Paul. On December 23rd of 1990, while at a Christmas party at the Homolka family home, Karla would spike her sister's drink with animal anesthetic, which she had stole from the clinic where she worked. That night, while the rest of the family were asleep and Tammy was unconscious, Homolka held a halothane soap cloth over her sister's mouth, and she and Paul took turns raping her, all while videotaping the whole incident. In the early morning of December 24th, Tammy was still unconscious, and when they checked on her, they had found that she had vomited and had stopped breathing. Instead of calling emergency services, Paul and Karla dressed Tammy and carried her back to her room. They then cleaned up the crime scene and hid the video evidence before finally calling emergency services. Tammy would be pronounced dead at the hospital. Paul and Karla were questioned, particularly about a burn that was on Tammy's face, which they explained away as a carpet burn from dragging Tammy to her bedroom while she was inebriated. As it turns out, it was actually as a result of the anesthetic called halothane that Karla had used. The medical professional on the case concluded that Tammy had choked to death on her vomit after drinking too much. In doing so, Karla and Paul would continue their crime spree. In June of 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey would become their next victim. On this fateful day, Leslie had missed her curfew and was locked out of her house. Paul approached her and struck up a conversation and would invite her back to his house, where he informed Paula that they had a playmate. The two would videotape themselves torturing and sexually abusing her. In one section of the tape that was played at Paul Bernardo's trial, the assault had escalated, and Leslie could be heard crying out in pain and begging him to stop. In the Crown's description of the scene, he was sodomizing her while her hands were bound with twine. The following day, as Paul would later confess, Karla would feed Leslie with a deadly dose of the anesthetic which would kill her. However, according to Karla, Paul had strangled her and put the body in the basement. The following day, after dinner at the family home, and after the remaining sister Lori had left, Paul and Karla decided that the best way to get rid of the evidence would be to dismember Leslie and encase her in cement. The two would make multiple trips to dump the cement blocks in Lake Gibson. A father and son on a fishing trip would discover one of the cement blocks near the shore on June 29th in 1991. Coincidentally, this was the day that Karla and Paul got married. The first cement block contained a human arms, legs, feet, and a head. The next day, the human torso floating on the water. The cement block containing the torso was said to weigh around 200 pounds. The remains were identified as that of Leslie Mahaffey of Burlington, Ontario, whom her parents had reported missing on June 15th. Her identity was confirmed via her dental records and her braces. While the police undertook the investigation into Leslie's murder, Paul and Karla were honeymooning in Hawaii. Kristen French was 15 years old when she was kidnapped from a church parking lot on April 16th of 1992 while she was on her way from school. Karla lured her over to the car under the guise of asking for directions. While Kristen was looking at the map, Paul forced her into the back seat with a knife. From the outset, both Paul and Karla knew that Kristen would have to die because she had clearly seen their face and would later know where they live. An article in the Washington Post reported that during the last hours of the sexual assault and torture, before Kristen French was killed, she was shown videotapes of Paul and what he had done to Leslie during the final punishment and agony in the same bedroom. Kristen experienced many indignities, and the more she cooperated, the worse it got. At one point, it is said that Paul Bernardo concentrated his indignities in the area of her face. He would rub his body parts in her face and at one point urinated on her. The torture went on for a day or two and was captured on video by Paul and Karla for their future enjoyment. The couple, however, were wise enough not to record her death. Not that was found to this day anyway. Kristen's naked, battered body was recovered 2 weeks later beside a rural road in Burlington. Within about 2 months of Karla turning herself in, it so happens that a DNA sample taken from Paul Bernardo turned up to be a match for the Scarborough rapist. He was put under surveillance before eventually being arrested. Paul was arrested on February 17th of 1993 and was charged with 9 different counts, including kidnapping, unlawful confinement, unlawful aggravated assault, and murder. When the search warrants were issued for his home, they were limited in the extent to which they could find and remove evidence. No damage could be done to the interior of the home in the search for evidence, and the videotapes had to be viewed in the house. Towards the end of February of 1993, the police found a tape that showed Karla and an unnamed prostitute performing oral sex on an unconscious and unidentified woman who would be Jane Doe. In May of 1993, after the search warrants had expired, Paul Bernardo instructed his attorney Ken Murray in writing to enter the house and remove but not watch 6 8mm videotapes hidden in a pot light in the bathroom. His attorney would keep the tapes in his possession for about 16 months, and it wasn't until September of 1994 that Ken Murray would turn the tapes over to John Rosen when he quit being Paul Bernardo's attorney. John Rosen would then turn them over to the police later on in that month. Paul Bernardo's trial began about 2 years later in May of 1995, and Karla was the prosecutor's key witness. She would take the stand for about 17 days, during which she testified that Paul was the mastermind and painted herself as a battered woman and victim who lived in terror of him. The videotapes found showed Karla and Paul engaged in sexual activity with 2 unidentified young women, among other things. Karla Homolka was clearly a willing participant in both encounters. On September 1st of 1995, the then 31-year-old Paul Bernardo was found guilty of 9 charges and sentenced to life in prison and declared a dangerous offender. Paul's parole application in 2018, after 25 years, was denied. One source reported another attempt at parole in June 2021, which was also denied. In November of 2015, it was reported that Paul had published a book on Amazon called Mad World Order, a 631-page book. After outrage of this, the book was pulled from Amazon, and it seemed that those who had already purchased the book would still have access. An article dated June of 2023 indicated that Paul Bernardo had been moved from the maximum security prison in Ontario, where he had been, to a medium security prison facility in Quebec. He was moved from the Millhaven Institute just outside of Kingston to the La Macaza Institute northwest of Montreal. It is reported that Paul Bernardo had applied for transfer to La Macaza in November 2022. He had applied earlier in the year to be moved to Bath Institute in Ontario, but that request was denied. Karla received a controversial plea deal that gave her 2 12-year sentences to run concurrently. In doing so, she would only spend 12 years in prison. This deal was struck prior to the authorities coming into possession of the damning videotapes. On the 18th of May, 1993, Karla Homolka was arraigned on 2 counts of manslaughter. At some point, she had written an apology letter to her family, in which she continued to blame Paul Bernardo for all her misdeeds. He wanted me to get sleeping pills from work, threatened me, physically and emotionally abused me when I refused. I tried hard to save her. These were excerpts from the letter that she had written. According to an article in the Los Angeles Times, dated March 19, 1996, it indicated that details of the Homolka plea deal was suppressed by the courts, apparently to protect the Paul Bernardo trial and to keep it untainted by the publicity. By the time the public was made aware of the details of Karla Homolka's plea deal, it was 2 years after the fact. It is unclear as to whether the Homolka family knew the truth of Karla's involvement versus the story that she had told them, but the Homolka family had stood by her during her case and during her prison sentence. The general public was outraged at the Crown's deal that was made with Karla Homolka. It was called the deal with the devil. Many citizens felt that, and still feel, that Karla is just as guilty as Paul Bernardo, and it seemed as though the authorities may have jumped the gun with making this deal with Karla. One source indicated that Michael Code, the Attorney General who approved the deal, said at the time, "In a perfect world, you would like to have both Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo in the box together facing murder charges. We had to compromise because we didn't have a case against Bernardo."
I'm letting my bangs grow. After all, I want to look my absolute best when I go to court and see Paul. I want him to drool when he sees me.
All eyes are now on accused killer Paul Bernardo in a downtown
The jury will hear from Karla Homolka.
In July 1995, Paul Bernardo went on trial in Toronto for the abduction, rape, and murder of teenagers Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French.
Videotapes said to depict chilling.
The prosecution's star witness, his former wife, Karla Homolka, already in prison for her part in those crimes and in the death of her sister.
It's all part of a deal she struck with the Crown in exchange for one thing: her testimony against Paul Bernardo.
She describes her role as both victimizer and victim.
If I didn't turn the water tap off completely, he'd hit me. If I didn't say the right thing, he'd hit me. He held knives to my throat. He told me I better watch my back. He said, always watch your back with me. Her feet were tied with that electrical cord that he had used to kill Leslie. And there was electrical cord around her neck.
I think that the country, and I think that the women in this country in particular, never believed a word she said. Didn't like the deal that they made and had a feeling that there was more to Karla Homolka than meets the eye.
And I thought for sure he was
we were able to get the tapes of the police interviews with her. And they actually don't take the form very much of the classic police interview, which is, you know, the camera in the corner with, you know, one person in the other corner and the cop asking questions. This was really, and this I think happened over 3 days. And it was in a hotel, I think in Oshawa. And she told her story in her own words with actually relatively little intervention from the police. And so for the first time, you actually saw Homolka and heard her in that voice, that little girl voice. And she, I think, completely exposed who she was. I mean, there was another tape that we obtained, which was her, also a police tape, which is her taking the police on a tour of the house, talking about what happened here and here and here. And she's dressed as a little schoolgirl. And is not the slightest bit concerned about the horrific events that had occurred there and that she'd been party to.
Can you answer a question for me? Was any of the furniture damaged as a result of the investigation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, good, sorry, I'm asking.
Amazing things happen on those tapes. She is dressed like a schoolgirl. At this time, she's a grown woman, right? She's dressed like a schoolgirl. She's speaking in this little schoolgirl voice. And upstairs in the bathroom where they cleansed Kristen French's body of evidence, Homolka inquired after her perfume samples.
But I don't have any of that stuff.
So where are all those articles from?
Wherever Paul's lawyer took them.
You're saying Paul's lawyer took a number of articles from you?
Well, from what I understand, his lawyer took basically everything. Can I ask you a question?
I'm afraid I can't answer
Can I have that book?
questions.
My sister wants it. Or does that have to stay there?
That has to stay for now, but we can make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
The thing that stood out for me was the part where she says he brought, I believe it was Kristen French home, and he served her a drink, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I was so upset because he served her booze in the glasses that we got for our anniversary, and I was really mad about that. So it's sort of like, let me get this straight, Karla. Your husband has brought home a girl that he's going to rape, torture, and murder. And the thing that bothers you the most is that they're drinking champagne out of a wedding gift?
Oh, and I was really mad, too, because when I took Buddy out, there were 2 champagne glasses on the dining room table. And we had these really expensive champagne glasses from France, which we never used. He had those out. The 2 of them had been drinking champagne from those glasses. And I was really mad. It was a stupid little...
Like, this says everything you need to know about her.
And I think that there was no question that in terms of a justice story, that was one of the biggest stories of the 90s.
It is understandable that they would want to get the rapist and murderer off the street, but in doing so, they allowed the co-conspirator in those crimes back on the street. Why couldn't the authorities withdraw the plea deal? More than 300,000 Canadians put their outrage into action by signing a petition for new immunity rules for the future. A search related to this petition found a Senate session resulting from the petition. However, no further information was found as to whether any changes were effected. There was also an inquiry by the Attorney General of Ontario, and I'll quote the excerpt. In respect to the prosecutor's decision not to charge Homolka with the murder after the videotapes were discovered, the inquiry held that it was not feasible for the prosecutors to charge Homolka. Such action would have violated the terms of the resolution agreement and is barred by the Criminal Code of Canada. Homolka had not committed fraud upon the Crown or the court that sentenced her. From the very beginning, she had advised the authorities that the videotapes existed, but she did not know where Bernardo had hidden them. Homolka had made full, complete, and truthful disclosure of all the criminal activities in which she participated and of which she had knowledge. She had lived up to her end of the resolution." End of quote. To this day, people question whether justice was really served, considering how much involvement Karla had and how light of a sentence she received. She was transferred in the summer of 1997 to the Joliet Institution, a medium-security prison in Joliet, Quebec, after the Kingston Prison for Women was closed. Her time in prison was not without a few interesting events, however. In 2000, photos were taken back in 1998 surfaced that showed Karla and her counterparts dressed up in black dresses. The photos show Karla Homolka and Christina Sherry. Apparently, they were having a birthday celebration while in prison. Christina Sherry and Tracy Gonzalez in 1995 and 1996 lured girls to a Montreal apartment where they were tortured, sexually assaulted, and forced to be sex slaves for one guy called James Medley, 41, who would be later convicted of crimes and sentenced to 26 years and declared a dangerous offender. A very chilling similarity to Karla Homolka's case. The photos were taken by a former inmate who described the Joliet prison as an adult daycare. Inmates could go for long strolls on the institution's spacious grounds and could play baseball. A description in his photos would show of an aerial that was taken around 2005. There were 10 cottages on the prison grounds, which housed 8 to 10 inmates each. There were no bars on the windows, and each inmate has a key to their own room and a key to their personal mailbox. There were prisoners on the prison grounds, however. The inmates also had the use of a camera that was available through the Recreation Committee, and that was shared by all the inmates, and they were able to send films out to be developed. In 1999, Toronto Star reporter Michelle Shepard came into possession of copies of an application for transfer of Karla Homolka to the Maison Thérèse Casgrain, run by Elizabeth Fry Society. And she published a story noting the proximity of this halfway house to local schools, hours before the Canadian government issued a publication ban on the information. Karla Homolka sued the government after her transfer to the Montreal halfway house was denied. The outcome of this suit has not been recorded or reported. In Joliet, Karla Homolka had a sexual affair with Linda Verneau, who was serving time for a series of armed robberies. It is said that she reoffended so that she could be sent back to Joliet to be with Karla, according to the Montreal Gazette. Also, while being evaluated in 2000, Karla told a psychiatrist that she did not consider her relationship to be homosexual, as Verneau saw herself as a man and had planned to have the sex operation in due course. Another psychiatrist noted in his report that Karla was ashamed of the relationship and hid it from her parents and the experts who examined her. The psychiatrist mentioned in his report that under the circumstances, the relationship was not abnormal. It seemed as though Karla would present different faces depending on her audience. Her former veterinary clinic co-worker and friend Wendy commented to the Toronto Sun that she now believes that Homolka's actions were that of a psychopath, not of an abused, controlled woman. Karla had promised her friend that she would explain herself, but she never tried to explain herself why she did what she did over time, as promised. The letters between the two would later end up on eBay, but were pulled before they were actually sold. While in prison, Karla Homolka took correspondence courses through the nearby Queen's University, which caused a media storm. She had to, however, pay all her fees, as well as take care of her personal needs, with her fortnightly income of $69. She did, however, tell author Stephen Williams in a subsequent letter that she did get some financial assistance. This was not well received by the public either. Karla Homolka would later graduate with a bachelor's degree in psychology from Queen's University. In July of 2005, Karla Homolka, then 35, was released from prison after serving 12 years. Prior to her release, she attempted to secure media restrictions on covering her post-prison life, which the judge denied. The judge involved in the release agreed that Karla Homolka may pose a risk to society and place several restrictions that would take effect upon her release. They include telling the police her home address, work address, and who she lives with, notifying the police as soon as any of the above changes, notifying the police if there's any change to her name. If she wants to be away from home more than 48 hours, she will have to give 72-hour notice. She cannot contact Paul Bernardo, the family of Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French or Jane Doe. Also, she may not contact any violent criminals. She was also forbidden from being with people under the age of 16 and from consuming drugs other than prescription medicine. Continued therapy and counseling, and also providing the police with a DNA sample. In November of 2005, a Quebec Superior Court judge lifted all restrictions imposed on Karla Homolka, saying that there was not sufficient evidence to justify them. As of this recording, Karla Homolka continues to live her life as a free woman, and Paul Bernardo remains in jail. Rest in peace to all the victims, and I hope that at some point in their lifetimes, their family will find some peace. Let me know your thoughts of this case. What do you think of the Crown's decision? Do you feel that justice was served? Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more true crime stories.